9 days and counting to the election, and we're counting up the early votes. Ahead on Face the State, tens of thousands of Ohioans are casting ballots every day during early voting. We'll break down the numbers of people voting by mail and in person, as well as by party. Which party is in the lead right now? Also, a crucial election that will decide control of the Ohio Supreme Court. We'll tell you about a tool to learn about the candidates vying for those 3 seats. Plus, he's a best-selling author and nationally known commentator on politics, race, and religion. I sit down with Dr. Michael Eric Dyson to talk about the presidential race and the importance of the black vote. With just 9 days until Election Day, more than 1.3 million Ohioans have already made their voices heard. And as time runs out to cast your vote, we're breaking down what you need to know before you head to the polls, from the major races to important deadlines. Thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. We start today with new voter data from the Ohio Secretary of State's office. It shows statewide around 55% of the more than 1.3 million votes were cast in person, while around 45% were returned mail-in ballots. This data also gives us a good idea as to who is casting those votes. It shows the majority, around 650,000 of them, are being cast by those 65 years old and older. Then the smallest groups are 35 to 44-year-olds and people 18 to 34. As for the political affiliation of voters, nearly 600,000 unaffiliated voters cast ballots so far. Then Republicans come in at 405,000 and Democrats are roughly 275,000. Nationwide, Democrats had a wide advantage over Republicans in early voting 4 years ago, but experts say there's evidence that the gap may be narrowing this time around. With more than 1 million mail-in ballots already requested in Ohio, some voters have questions about how much it costs to return those ballots. We've received messages from 10 TV viewers saying when they took their absentee ballots to the post office to be weighed, the postage cost more than what the packet instructions said it would. So we took their concerns to election officials who tell me if you follow the instructions that come with the absentee ballot, your ballot will get delivered.
The Postal Service assures us that election mail receives special handling. And so even if you lack the correct postage, it will eventually get to your Board of Elections.
In Franklin County, the instructions with the absentee packet show you need 73 cents postage. That's one forever stamp. One viewer told us when she took hers to the post office to get it postmarked, they weighed it and it cost 28 cents more than that. The Franklin County Board of Elections spokesman assured me if you put a stamp on your ballot and put it in the mailbox, it will get to them. Secretary of State Frank LaRose confirmed that, but did say the postage can vary across the state.
Based on where you live, you may have local levies, local candidates that may differ from other parts of the state. So if you have a 2-page ballot, for example, it may only require 1 stamp, but if your ballot goes to 3 or 4 pages, the weight of that may put it into the category where it requires additional postage. So just follow the instructions that are right there in your ballot for the correct amount of postage.
Franklin County shared this picture of a ballot they received, even though it had postage due of 28 cents. LaRose also emphasized that voters can track their ballots by going to voteohio.gov/track. If you still plan to vote by mail, your absentee ballot applications must be received by your County Board of Elections office no later than 8:30 Tuesday night. That's October 29th. Mailed absentee ballots must then be postmarked by November 4th. For those planning to vote early in person, here's when you can. Polls are open this afternoon from 1 to 5. Then hours vary every day leading up to next Sunday, which is the last day to vote early in person at the Board of Elections office. The only place you can vote early is at your County Board of Elections office. Also, make sure you bring a valid photo ID, such as your Ohio driver's license or U.S. passport. There are several major races bringing voters out to the polls, from the presidential race to statewide races and ballot measures. A key one is actually 3 races for seats on the Ohio Supreme Court. On your ballot, you will see those 3 races. If Democrats win all 3, they would hold the majority for the first time since the 80s. Just 3 years ago, in 2021, Ohio passed a law that puts each candidate's political affiliation next to their name on the ballot. But for seats that are supposed to be nonpartisan, how can you learn more about candidates beyond their party? This morning, 10 TV's Rochelle Aline dives into a tool designed to help voters decide.
A quick poll of Ohio voters shows they know the importance of casting their ballot.
I'm from Venezuela, where we used to be a democracy and then boom, changes for the last 25 years.
It is important to vote because this is where decisions are made.
Especially when it comes to the 3 state Supreme Court seats that are up for grabs.
I think all of the races are extremely important, particularly the state Supreme Court, because it will affect things for many years to come.
But when it comes to choosing who to put in those seats, a state elections survey found that more than 60% of voters struggle because they don't know enough about the candidates.
Who am I voting for? Why am I voting for? What's your history? What's your record?
And it's leading some to rely on party lines.
I admit that I felt somewhat unsure because I'm not particularly familiar with those names on the ballot, but I'm trusting party affiliation.
Or a cheat sheet to help make a choice.
My wife got me to write down who I need to vote for based on how I feel about things in this world, and that's the way I do it.
But according to the Ohio Bar Association, it's also leading others to not vote in those races at all. To help everyone make a more informed decision, they created judicialvotescount.org. The site has information on judicial races by county, profiles on judges, and answers to commonly asked questions.
You'll hear from them about what their legal experience is, what their judicial philosophy is, what their community involvement has been, and you'll be able to judge a little bit more about their character as well.
And though the site does include party affiliation, leaders with the Bar Association are encouraging voters not to give that too much weight.
Judges are supposed to set aside any bias and decide a case based on the facts before them and how the law is applied as written. So what's more important to look at is their experience, is their community involvement, and their judicial philosophy.
In Columbus, Rochelle Aline, 10 TV News.
Meanwhile, there's just one statewide issue on your ballot, Issue 1. You've likely seen the political signs everywhere. This is a proposed constitutional amendment about gerrymandering. It would put the political map drawing process in the hands of citizens instead of politicians if voters approve it. We've talked about it before on this show, but as a reminder, Issue 1 would replace the current Legislative and Congressional Map-Making Commission that's made up of 7 lawmakers with a 15-member citizen commission. It would include 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 independents. No politicians, lobbyists, or political party officials will be allowed on the commission. There would also be public meetings for people to weigh in on the maps before they are approved by the commission. Your vote this November is not only playing a major role in Ohio, but on the national stage. Political experts say Ohio's U.S. Senate race will be close, and it could determine which political party controls the Senate. This morning, 10 TV's Angela Ann explains why Ohio is finding itself playing such a vital role.
The stakes couldn't be higher in the Ohio Senate race.
The ads are everywhere.
Sherrod Brown, way too liberal for Ohio.
Senator Sherrod Brown and businessman Bernie Moreno going head-to-head for your vote this November.
Bernie Moreno doesn't care about Ohio. He's only out for himself.
They're spending millions on ads alone as both the Republican and Democratic Party invest in this critical U.S. Senate race. But why is Ohio and your vote so important on the national stage? Experts say it all comes down to controlling the Senate.
So they need to win Ohio. Without Ohio, there is no way to count to 50 for Democrats.
David Niven is a political science professor at the University of Cincinnati. He says out of the 34 Senate races unfolding across the nation, Ohio is one of the closest.
Boy, it comes down that tight.
Yeah, it's that tight. And not only are we talking about 50-50, but we're talking about a race in Ohio that could very well itself be a 50-50 race, where Sherrod Brown or Bernie Moreno could win this by a very tight margin.
Right now, Democrats are holding onto a slim 51 to 49 seat majority. But West Virginia's Democratic Senator Joe Manchin decided not to run for re-election. And political experts say that seat is now likely to flip red. That creates a 50-50 split. But Montana and Ohio are also extremely close races. Both have Democrats running for re-election. And if just one senator loses this November, Republicans would take control of the Senate.
Senator John Tester, very much like Sherrod Brown, very well known, very well established, but he's running against the tide as a Democrat in a Republican state. So the basic breakdown here is best case scenario for Democrats, they somehow get to 50 by holding Montana, holding Ohio.
If the election ends with a 50-50 tie in the Senate, that means your vote for the next president of the United States becomes even more important, as the new vice president becomes that tie-breaking vote on the Senate floor.
And that was Angela Ann reporting. We've made it easy to find everything you need to know before you go to the polls. Just text the word VOTE to 614-460-3345 and we'll send you a link to our voter guide. It includes a list of important dates and deadlines we talked about, plus a breakdown of the major races and measures on your ballot. Ahead on Face the State, he's a nationally known author and commentator on civil rights, black culture, and politics. I sat down with Dr. Michael Eric Dyson during his recent visit to Columbus. Plus, Trump versus Harris on the economy. Central Ohio experts weigh in. One of the major focuses this presidential election is the economy. Both former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are promising to lower prices in America, but they are bringing different approaches. Harris says to bring down prices, she wants to attack price gouging by companies. She also plans to provide relief to families with a tax credit for new parents, a child tax credit, and end taxes on tips. To help with the housing crisis, she wants to build 3 million new homes and provide a $25,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers. She also says she supports a tax credit for new businesses. As for Trump, he has not released much on his plan. He said he wants to raise tariffs, cut business taxes, and end taxes on both tips and overtime pay. However, local economists are concerned. They say that would cause prices to rise for consumers.
When we start talking about more universal and widespread tariffs applied to allies and adversaries alike, it's really a dangerous economic idea because there's a lot of things that we import that we just can't make in the United States. And so tariffs work by raising the price that we're importing the goods at. And so it makes domestic production that is less efficient, more competitive with that higher import price.
It is hard to see how in the short run it brings down prices if people are focused on inflation. Trump has tried to claim that tariffs would largely be paid by foreign countries and foreign manufacturers. But I think the reality is a nice chunk of tariffs would be borne by American consumers.
Economists also say that regardless of which candidate wins, it will be hard for either of them to actually go forward with their plans. That's because they'll need most of their proposals to be passed by Congress. The Columbus Urban League held its 49th annual Empowerment Day on Tuesday. Hundreds of people filled the ballroom at a downtown hotel for the event. The Urban League says Empowerment Day celebrates businesses and community leaders championing change and paving the way for a fully inclusive economy. This year's keynote speaker was Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. He is the author of more than 25 books, including 7 bestsellers. He writes about civil rights, hip-hop, black culture, and politics. Dr. Dyson also regularly appears on national news programs and talk shows to discuss his books and these topics. He's also a professor at Vanderbilt University and has taught at Princeton, Brown, and Georgetown. I had the chance to sit down with Dr. Dyson to talk about this year's presidential election, race in politics, and the message he brought to the Columbus Urban League's Empowerment Day.
We want to talk about the history of America in regard to the profound democracy we now enjoy, but also some of the obstacles and barriers to economic parity that have created such yawning abysses between communities, what their economic wherewithal is, what they're able to do in terms of job, remuneration, what they're capable of doing in terms of the relationship between education and employment. So we want to kind of probe the structural features that prohibit the flourishing of certain communities and see if we can't stimulate a conversation about what we can do to make things better.
And how important is it to achieve that more inclusive economy in 2024?
It's extremely important. You know, given the election we're now, undergoing, people say, well, it's always, the most important election of our lifetimes. I think it is. And there are vastly different visions at stake here. So it's important for us to talk about inclusion, not exclusion, to talk about diversity, not monoculture, to speak about multiculturalism, the varieties of peoples that are the strength of American society. So I think this is the right time, a propitious time, to speak about what we do to embrace immigrants, to embrace transgender, gay, lesbian, African American, Latino, poor white brothers and sisters struggling in Appalachia and the like. This is the time for all of us to come together.
What are your thoughts on the way this presidential race is shaping up now with, just less than 2 weeks to go?
Well, I've got a new meaning to the Arnold Palmer drink, I'll tell you that. Look, we can try to pretend that this is normal for a president or an ex-president to act as our former president, Trump. And this is not about ideology, because people will believe what they believe, either with Vice President Harris or former President Trump. But the means and method of expression, of difference, of contrast, is highly combustible. And I think that calling people names, calling them dumb, speaking about their intellectual capacity, speaking disparagingly about their race and the like, this is beneath us as a nation. So we have to elevate the conversation. If that former president can't do it, then the rest of us, right or left, center, centrist, or liberal, or conservative, or radical on either side, we've got to reclaim the virtue of civilized discourse and disagreement in a nation where we are allowed to express our differences.
Obviously, Vice President Harris has the opportunity to be the first woman of color to become the President of the United States. I guess, how different, in your opinion, are the racial dynamics of politics now compared to when, say, former President Obama was running the first time?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I mean, Obama's in 2008, 2009, and here we are in 2024. In some ways, things have changed tremendously. We've got as you said, a woman of color, a black woman, an Indian woman, the first woman of any race to become president. So that could be a triple whammy right there, a triumvirate, a trilogy. On the other hand, we've got the persistence of lethal racism and bigotry and gender oppression and the disregard for difference. And I think that, again, with our former president saying the kind of nefarious things he's saying, it reminds us that it's not just him alone, but there are many other people who share in his beliefs. That's not the America we want to see. We want to see an emboldened America for truth, justice, and democracy, not for slipping back into our negative and prejudicial viewpoints that really discourage bringing the nation.
How important is the black vote in 2024's presidential election?
Oh, the black vote is extremely important. I know a lot has been made about whether black men are going to support Kamala Harris, but they are the #2 constituency supporting Kamala Harris after black women. It's hard to beat black women in anything, especially in voting. But the black vote is central because we got so many other people. White women, half of them are voting for Donald Trump. You want to ask, are you concerned about your bodies? Are you concerned about bodily autonomy? Are you concerned about the ability of women to make a choice? And some of the more radical elements of the Republican Party say, even if you're raped, you got to keep the baby. So I think women are rethinking their commitment to the Republican Party, but too many of them, in deference to their husbands or the men in their lives or other conservative forces, maybe their churches, their evangelical, sanctuaries, they end up embracing policies that hurt them. So it's incumbent upon African American people, fortunately or unfortunately, fairly or not, to be involved in as express and as explicit a manner to try to help, without sounding too dramatic, save democracy.
You've talked also about encouraging young black men to vote. Is it a concern that they're not interested in politics, or is it just that effort to get them to the polls and to learn about what's going on?
Right. Well, you know, when you constantly discourage people from voting, when you have voting suppression practices and laws, when there are sneaky attributes to a particular party that tries to keep those people from the polls, it's no wonder that a large swath of them are disinterested. That's not for me. It doesn't make any difference anyway. You know, it's like when somebody, you know, defeats you and you go, I'm taking my ball and go home anyway. So your reaction is in response to the denial of opportunity. So we've got to fix that, number one. Number two, I don't think that members of the black community are any more inclined not to vote than members of other communities. It's just that the focus is on them because there are fewer of African-American men and women in this country, relatively speaking, in regard to the larger population. So there are many apathetic members of the larger population. I teach at Vanderbilt. I teach mostly white kids. Trust and believe. Apathy doesn't have any racial coding here. But it is important to encourage those people whose ancestors struggled in a very powerful way, sometimes sacrificing their lives to vote, that they remember that legacy and try to lay claim to that democratic heritage that they have fought so hard for.
Finally, sir, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the near future of the United States?
Well, Reinhold Niebuhr, the great theologian, said, optimism is too shallow a virtue. You put your finger up, the wind's blowing, okay, I feel good. If not, I feel bad. Hope is deeper than optimism. I'm hopeful about this nation. As Howard Thurman, the great mystic, said, you know, you can be a prisoner of the events of your time, or you can be a prisoner of hope. I choose to be a prisoner of hope. I think that this great democracy will not only thrive, it will do extraordinary things if we are permitted as citizens of this nation to lead it in that direction.
Still ahead on Face the State. Are you tired of the political ads? Are you annoyed with friends and family who don't agree with your politics? Are you just stressed out by the possible outcomes of the election? We're looking at the causes of and solutions for election stress. As we've discussed today, there are a lot of important races and issues on your ballot this year. That's why experts say elections like this one can impact a person's mental health. A study by Secret Nature found about 1 out of every 3 people reported stress due to the general election. 1 in every 2 people admitted to arguing with family members over politics. And 7 out of every 10 people say the biggest cause of stress is a family member supporting a different candidate. Psychiatrists say changes, like a new president, leave us vulnerable to stress, which can lead to anxiety and depression. Signs of stress include trouble sleeping, loss of appetite, upset stomach, sweating, and excessive worry. To overcome those feelings, experts say avoid catastrophizing. That's when your mind jumps to the worst-case scenario for your side.
Political ads are the epitome of this. It convinces us that if we vote for candidate X, disaster will happen. This seeps into our subconscious and replays over and over again. So stay in the present.
Psychologists say you can also ease election stress by limiting your exposure and taking a break from the election if you need to. Plus, if you're finding yourself stressing over differing opinions posted on social media, health experts say to go off the grid for a while. Thank you for joining me this week for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you next Sunday at 11:30.